to speak about your brand new book, Above. It was selected as the best buzz book. Now, why don't you introduce us to what we're going to read when we open up the pages of Above?
Above is my second novel. It's been published in the US by Simon & Schuster and in the UK and South Africa by Harder. And it's a thriller. It's very different from my first novel. It's one of those edge-of-your-seat dramatic tellings of a girl who's 16 years old, living in the middle of the country when she's abducted by a survivalist, an extreme prepper who's convinced that the end of the world is going to happen. And he takes her from her little town's annual carnival event to an abandoned missile silo, a World War II era Atlas F missile silo that he has been preparing. In it, he has all the things necessary for starting the world again after the apocalypse. And the only thing that's been missing is a woman of sound womb. So he has now found this in the 16-year-old Blythe Hallowell, and he keeps her there for 17 years. And it's the story of her struggle to come to terms with living in captivity. And at first she has to try and find all ways of escape, and then to deal with the kind of encroaching madness of her captor, but nothing prepares her actually for when she has to raise a child in captivity. That kind of gives her a whole new perspective on what her role and her mission is going forward.
Now, Blythe is the 16-year-old girl we're talking about. Can you introduce us to her character and tell us how she developed in your head?
Well, much as with my first novel, she kind of just appeared. She appeared in my imagination as a very compelling figure. I didn't really kind of construct her. The more I sat and wrote, the more she made herself known to me. In the beginning, she's a normal 16-year-old American girl that, as I said, lives in the middle of the country. So she lives in a small town, and there's kind of an innocence. The night that she's abducted is the night that she has her first kiss. So she has the romance and the struggles of a teen, of a young woman, and it was tricky to chart her development because she goes from that innocent young girl into being a woman who has to fight this enormous battle, an unimaginable tragedy. And we see her going through these different stages as she matures, but also as she's being subjected to these terrible horrors by this crazed abductor. And then finally, she is in the role of a mother. So she there are many different facets to her character, and you see her develop into a complex survivor, a woman of indomitable strength.
Now, the story takes many twists and turns, but before we get to that, why don't you introduce us to this crazed abductor, the survivalist? What made you want to write about a survivalist?
Well, I didn't want to write the story in the beginning. I mean, this is not my kind of genre. It deals a lot with kind of apocalyptic themes. It's an abduction theme. That's not something I necessarily gravitate to. But again, I was just compelled by this idea, and I knew I didn't want to make him one of those perverts that we read about in the news. I think we have a really good sense of what motivates those kind of creeps. And Dobbs Horden is an even more scary antagonist because he is meticulous and self-controlled. His objective isn't to just have perverted sex with the person that he's captured. He is very single-minded about this goal that the world is going to come to an end, and feels an obligation and a duty to carry on humankind. So to give an insider, he's been preparing this place for years, and he's retrofitted this missile silo. He has historical documents, copies of the Constitution and various other things. He has a massive seed catalog so he can plant a garden when they reemerge. he has the DNA of about every creature known to man. So there's one room that is filled with all these bottles with specimens in it. And he's planned for every eventuality. So he's a formidable force, and that brings out even more of our main character, our hero in Blythe. That brings out more of her character, more of her resilience. And what I wanted to do was really provide an insight into those end-of-world survivalist types. And all you have to do is type in Google, do a little search on that, and you'll see that there's a lot of people who subscribe to the end-of-the-world theory, and they run the gamut from these kind of crazy, kooky guys to people really who follow the science. And so I wanted to portray a little bit of that and give an insight into that world.